listen to them because you can't really see much. I put them on YouTube. If you want, I can throw you the. I put them on my channel.
What? What's my thing?
I don't know. I'd have to send you the link.
Okay. You can get some?
Yeah, I just put them on in the background, so it's kind of
Yeah, that's good.
osmose.
Okay. 3 down, 2 to go. Roll the hump. Downward slide. Several ways you can express this. And of course, that means easier. Good. So it should be easier from now on. All the classes did pretty good. You were 1 point less than the 10 o'clock, I think, because they only had 2 Fs and no Ds. That's probably why that affected them 1 point. But you're all the only ones that had anyone with 100 or more. So, but everyone's doing well. And you know, I counted half off on the blood flows and half off on the multiple choice matching. Everyone was doing pretty good on getting that. Did that pretty good. We have the 2-pointer. Won't be any more of those. Okay, but a lot of people got a couple of more points. And you know, always get the ones that a few, you know, 2 or 3 that don't have any confidence. Like this one, I don't know where it was, so I'm just telling you, I don't know which one it was now. But they said they had a 68. That's what they wouldn't get, and they got, I think, in the high 80s or maybe 90s. So way off. I think there's probably the reverse. Anyway, so we're through with that system, and oh, there was one thing that I picked up on again. I mean, I pick up a lot of times with this one. I thought I just mentioned again the reading the cards over there. I tell you to read them. You know, you ought to give yourself a chance anyway, because if you try and guess what I want, you might guess wrong. Okay. And you remember the kidney over there had the 2 phrenic arteries. I was pointing to the 2 phrenic arteries on the kidney. And I got a lot of answers back, thoracic aorta or abdominal aorta. And you know, that tells me you did not really read the question, because the question says, what are these 2 little stubs sticking up? These 2 little stubs. How can that be a thoracic aorta? Okay, so read. You know, I'm sure that probably some of you missed points because you really didn't read what I wanted. Okay, so just a hint, you know, if you don't want to give yourself that chance of getting something right, stop reading. Okay? All right. And we had all these blood flows. That was the highlight of the 30-point lecture type thing. So you're probably thinking, okay, what's coming up? You know, what's going to be the highlight on that 30% lecture this time? Okay, so I will let you know again. Now, cranial nerves. Cranial nerves is going to be a biggie on the 30% part, and you're going to be, I'm going to point to a lot of cranial nerves on either cadaver, well, on the cadaver for sure, and on models for sure. So you're going to get a heavy dose of cranial nerves. Okay, so you might want to get started on that, and so be kind of prepared for that. Which kind of goes to these things over here that you need to have again, the objectives as always, the checklist, cadaver structures. We have both male and females. Won't be much on the male. Got a little bit on the armpit and the eye muscles, but all going to be on the males. Cranial nerve practice exam. Okay, this is a great, big, huge matching question. So you're matching the 12 cranial nerves with all the things that you need to know about them, which you can get off the objectives, by the way. You don't have to look at any book to do that. You need to make several copies of that. Okay, and you need to take that test. You know, the first time through, you're gonna have to look up all the answers maybe, and then take it several times until you can take that test without getting anything wrong. Okay? Once you can take that test without getting anything wrong, you'll do perfectly well on the 30%. It's that part with the cranial nerves. So, and I'll be going over that a little bit with you when we get to that Monday. The functional areas. There is a page, it might be under keys. There's a page that looks like this. It's got a diagram of the brain with dots on it. These are the functional, sensory, and motor areas. And it goes with the Victor Victoria brain and the torsal brain. They both have these marks on them to identify those. Those are the only two brains you're going to have to learn this on. But these are functional areas, so you might want to get that. It helps you get them all together in one place. Okay. You know, this probably is my favorite system. You know, usually you think, it's probably my favorite system for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is for like 16 so years, I taught neurophysiology to the physical therapy and occupational therapy students at the Health Science Center. So really got into that. The other thing is that this is one system I just had no idea how it works. I mean, I cannot somehow, I mean, I know places where the function area, but when you really get down to the nitty gritty of how it works, it just doesn't make, I don't know how that occurs. What I see, hear, feel, everything. It just blows my mind. And I'm going to kind of touch upon that a little bit later here. So I'll come back to that. All right, so what we want to do is get a little terminology down, some general things before I hit basically all the overhead. Nervous system, okay? What are the motor things that a nervous system can do? Remember, a nervous system is a control system. It's the electrical control system of all of those, everything we've done up to now, plus all the organ systems we're going to be looking at. Electrical control. What, though, is their motor output? What's the thing that they can cause? This system, what can it cause? Two things. Two things. It causes a muscle to contract or a gland to secrete. That is the motor output of the nervous system. Now you think maybe, well, what about memory and all that sort of stuff? Well, you know, you got memory up there, but until you actually put it to work, it's not doing anything. You know, it's not causing a muscle to contract or a gland to secrete until you kind of put it to work. But that's the final outcome. That's the effectors. Okay? I'm kind of following this along, but we're looking up here on the motor part. Okay, so it's going to cause something to happen, to control something. But to do that, it needs information. It needs to find out what it should be doing. What's happening in your body that might need to be corrected. Okay, so it has a sensory part as well. It picks up messages. Okay, you all have probably taken your blood pressure. Maybe you've got something at home, you can take your blood pressure, you go wherever, you know, you've probably taken it before, you take your blood pressure and if it's too high, you probably go to the doctor or whatever and find out what's wrong and correct it, whatever. But did you know that there are two places inside your body that take your blood pressure? all the time. And you were looking at them. All this last unit, you were looking right at them. One is on the back of the aortic arch. Where the aortic arch is, right back there, there's a sensory receptor that detects blood pressure. And the other one, we had the external carotid, the internal carotid taken off. Right at the base of the internal carotid, there is a sensory receptor that detects blood pressure. So if the blood pressure drops, it says, ooh, I need to affect the heart, make the heart beat faster or whatever, so there's things that react to that. So the body can do that on its own, to the point, obviously.
Did you say
So,
was the first one on the back of the thoracic aorta?
how's that?
Was the first sensor on the back of the
It's on the back of the aortic arch.
aortic arch?
Aortic arch. Called the peripheral chemoreceptor. Okay. Anyway, and I'm kind of going to be leaving out pretty much all the time the information processing. Obviously, the sensory stuff has to cause a muscle to contract or a gland to secrete. Okay? All right. I'm going to, well, remember we haven't done tissues, nerve tissue. We haven't done that yet. And basically, nerve tissue is only cells, sort of like the epithelial. And the main cell, of course, is the neuron. And we do have a neuron model. So there will be some things you need to know microscopically again on that. But there are some other cells as well that are important. They're called the neuroglia or neuroglial cells. We'll look at those a little bit later. But right now, what we want to do is get some terminology down. And I'm going to draw up here a neuron. And we're going to be focusing on two words right now. Okay, I've already told you, sensory, motor, that's kind of the whole spectrum of the nervous system. Okay? What I'm drawing here is a neuron. Not all neurons look alike. Okay, there's going to be differences. And obviously that's a cell. The neuron is a one cell. So there's a cell body called the soma, or cell body. And we've looked at those. I mean, we've done a generalized cell, so you would expect mitochondria and all that other stuff here. There's also the cytoplasmic extensions that we talked about briefly. We have a dendrite and an axon. You've probably heard those words in high school somewhere. Those are extensions. You remember on the muscle cell we had T-tubules, which were invaginations of the cell membrane. These are evaginations. So this is cell membrane going all the way out. Okay? This is a neuron. At the level of a neuron, you can identify a sensory and motor component. Right here. This is sensory. This is motor. So what that means, the cell body and the dendrites receive information. And then they compute it and decide what the message has to be, and they will instigate a series of nerve impulses here, and this is going to be the motor part, which is going to cause something to happen. Muscle contracts, gland secretes. Okay? So at the level of a neuron. However, what I just drew didn't mention, but this is a motor neuron. So we have motor versus sensory neurons. So any one cell is either motor or sensory. It can't be both. So that's a motor neuron. That happens to be the one that's hooking up with all your skeletal muscles that you were learning. Okay? So that's a motor neuron. But there are sensory neurons as well. So, at that level, you have a motor and sensory, kind of a hierarchical increasing there. So it can be one or the other. It cannot be both. And we can even add on to that a motor or sensory pathway. So in other words, let's put a bunch of motor neurons together and create a motor pathway which elicits some sort of motor activity. Okay, so it's just increasing the number of neurons, obviously. Okay, so you can see kind of a hierarchy, and it all works up to the very general that we just started with at the first. So motor versus sensory. Okay. Now there's two words I'm going to throw at you: somatic and visceral. Somatic and visceral. Okay, those are going to pop up all the time. Anytime you see somatic, you're talking about skeletal muscles. And here's somatic nervous system, you're talking about skeletal muscles. Visceral, you're talking about cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. These over here. But you don't see the word visceral there. But you do see visceral down here. So we can have